You are about to enjoy a production of the Ella Wellness Network. This is Wellness Fixes the Pod. I'm your host, Dr. Kelsey Vick, and I'm so happy you're here. Welcome to the Wellness Sisterhood. The history of the menstrual cycle and humanity's view of the menstrual cycle had me cracking up while I was researching for this episode. So we are going to chat all about it today, how the menstrual cycle was viewed in the time of Aristotle and Hippocrates up until today, and how our current marketing still pushes some of the ideals set by Hippocrates and Aristotle like way back when. So let's get into it. Welcome back to Wellness Fixes the Pod. I'm your host, Dr. Kelsey Vick, a board-certified orthopedic doctor of physical therapy, a pelvic floor physical therapist, and the owner and founder of the Ella Wellness Sisterhood. And this episode is going to be part one of our menstrual cycle program launch series. We are 2 weeks away by the time this episode gets released from launching the menstrual cycle program, and I am so excited. This has been in the works for probably 8 months and testing, from filming to testing. So a few of the basics: it's going to be 8 weeks, which is what the feedback from you guys was. It's going to have 3 to 4 workouts a week, all able to be done at home, but also in the gym. It's going to go through every single phase of your menstrual cycle for 2 cycles, if that makes sense. That's why it's 8 weeks long. That way you get pretty much 2 months worth of workouts that you can redo over and over and over again if you want. Or I like to tell people, you can take what you need from them, take the cueing, and then apply it to your own life. It's going to come with a menstrual cycle guidebook, which is going to have everything from understanding your menstrual cycle, tracking, resources, why you might feel a certain way. It compiles everything that we've been learning about the menstrual cycle into one easy reference resource. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be one of the most accessible and jam-packed menstrual cycle programs that anyone has ever seen, and I'm so proud of it. I'm so excited for you guys to try it out. Let me know what you think, and I will be doing an entire sort of menstrual cycle launch leading up to it. So over the next 2 weeks, we'll be doing, and honestly 3 weeks, even during when the program comes out, we'll be doing a lot of menstrual cycle content, but in a fun way. Like today, I was like, you know what? Let me go through the history of the menstrual cycle and how our ancestors viewed it, because that's always been kind of interesting to me, because we haven't always had pads and tampons. So how did our ancestors actually handle their own menstrual cycles, and what was the viewpoint on them? So we will get into all of that today, but stay tuned. If you want to sign up for the menstrual cycle, I'll leave the link in the show notes below. It is going to come out again in 2 weeks, beginning of April. So stay tuned, and there will be a special gift for you if you sign up, and you can download that special gift immediately if you sign up before the program actually launches. I'll also be linking all of the previous menstrual cycle episodes below. That way we can go back through, and if you want to re-listen to them and just sort of learn about your own menstrual cycle and how one of the phases you might feel more motivated than the other, why your workouts might not feel great in a certain time frame and they might in another, why you might be willing to approach growth opportunities in one, but then in the other phases you're shifted more towards pulling away from failures and things that might cause us either emotional, psychological, or physical harm. So we cover all of that on the podcast, and that will be all in the resource guidebook in a super easy to read, easy to use way. But enough menstrual cycle program talk. Let's get into today's episode. We'll start off in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And when I was researching this, again, it was super duper funny to me, because, and I'm almost sad a little bit to see how much of it has carried through to today, and how much all of these wonderful companies are trying to combat against some of the logic and theories that were created way back in ancient Greece and ancient Rome in the Hippocrates and Aristotle time frame. So we'll start off with Aristotle's viewpoints. There were sort of 2 diverging viewpoints of the menstrual cycle. One from Aristotle, and he was more of a philosopher. I'm terrible at history, so do not ask me any other history besides this. And this was a heavy amount of research, but Aristotle in general had more of a philosophy background, where Hippocrates is the father of modern medicine. So he was coming at it from more of a physician background. So from Aristotle's point of view, he viewed women as inferior to men, and The reasoning for that is that men provided the seed for fertilization, where women just provided the location for the babies to grow. And he compared men's semen, which was like that seed of fertilization, it allowed procreation and reproduction, to women's semen, which he said was the menstrual cycle. So our periods was what he considered the like comparison to men's semen. And obviously we know that that's not the case, but because women's, he called it literally semen's inferior, did not produce the same like seed of fertilization that men's did, that's why he thought, or one of the reasons he thought, that women were inferior to men. And he said some pretty nasty things about women in general. So some of his like writings called us mutilated males because again, we weren't these fully developed creatures that could also like contribute to reproduction and give that seed of fertilization. We were strictly the like location where the baby was born. He also has said we should look upon the female state as being, as it were, a deformity, though one which occurs in the ordinary course of nature. He also compared our like periods to the blood of sacrificial animals, which again, all of that sounds like I am very, very happy to be born during this time frame that we are born in. But this is where some of the like oldest talked about and written about concepts were of the menstrual cycle. And so we can see how that has sort of evolved again in a positive way, but still thinking, is that one of the contributors to the whole gender discrepancy in a lot of different areas of life, not just in how we handle sort of reproduction. From the Hippocrates standpoint, he again was the father of modern medicine. He viewed men and women as both necessary for reproduction. So he viewed them as equals when it came to reproduction. However, his viewpoint on women's bodies were that women were more spongy than men. And so in general, when women ate and drank, we absorbed more, and that liquid and those toxins and that excess would just keep building up. And once a month, we would have to expel it, or else we would get sick or possibly even die. So menstruation was a sign of like cleansing almost, and it was, in his mind, required in order for women to not build up some of this toxicity and some of this like bad substances in their body. And again, he came at it where it could lead to illness or death if a woman didn't menstruate, and that menstruation should be something that happens in order to clear us of these toxins. So his whole idea was being able to control menstruation, and not for the sake of women's health, heaven forbid, but because women were thought to be happier and healthier when their main goal was focused on reproduction. So it all comes back to this like goal of reproduction. But sometimes they would do things like forcing menstruation on people in not the natural way in order to like shed some of these toxins that were thought to contribute to sickness, illness, and just like toxicity within their bodies, and then also the environment. He also believed women on their periods, and this is like one of his phrases, could sink ships, spoil cheese, tarnish silver, and kill livestock. So we can see that women are sponges and we have to rid ourselves of this toxicity. And when we're on our periods, we can do all of these like bad things like kill livestock and sink ships and spoil cheese because of all of these toxins within our body that we have to shed. So that was one of the like routes, like the Hippocrates route and then the Aristotle route, as far as where people's viewpoints of the menstrual cycle came from back in those days. And we could kind of see some of those thoughts carried over throughout history. There's a guy called, and again, I'm not probably going to say his name right, but Pliny the Elder is what he was known as. And this was honestly probably where it got the most hysterical for me, but he's just a real gem. He was a Roman physician who wrote an encyclopedia and included a significant section on menstruation, which props to him, because I feel like a lot of the time men don't like to bring up menstruation, men don't like to talk about the menstrual cycle or women's periods, or it's something sort of like shameful and secretive, which we'll get to that later, but is the shame and privateness and secrecy of our menstrual cycles today, can it be tied back to some of these like historical figures and historical logic, historical male logic, as why women were inferior, why our blood was like the same as sacrificing an animal, and why we needed to like rid ourselves of these toxins? You know, is that one of the deep rooted reasonings that we're trying to overcome even to this day. So Pliny the Elder, he believed women on their periods are isolated, walking through fields naked and looking disheveled. That's how he wrote about women who were on their periods. So very, very pleasant. And again, looking disheveled, half dressed, like isolated in a field, a little aloof. People didn't want to talk to them. So those are sort of his views in the picture that he paints for a woman on her period. Here's a comical list of some of the things that he also wrote about a woman on her period, and then also people who would interact with women on their periods. So pregnant women will miscarry if touched or even looked at by a woman on her period. Pregnant women will miscarry if they come into contact with menstrual blood or even step over it. Menstruating females will kill plants, insects, and make seeds infertile. Menstruating females will make bees leave their hives. The color purple, thought to be a royal color and hard to make, would tarnish at a woman's touch if she were on her period. So some of these things are just hysterical. But again, like it was truthful for back in the day. That's like what they thought, and that's how women were treated back in the day, and that's how women were viewed. So looking historically, we can kind of see some of that carry through today. So some of the overarching themes: women were inferior to men, our overall health and happiness depended on our ability to reproduce. A big focus on reproduction. And not only were we harmed by our menstrual cycles and the toxicity of our periods, but the world around us was harmed by the toxicity of our periods and our menstrual cycles, primarily like during menstruation. So that's the history, like ancient history of how the menstrual cycle was viewed. But what about feminine hygiene and feminine care? Because we've had periods, throughout this whole time, and pads and tampons and menstrual cups and discs and all of these things were not around for the majority of female history. So what did they use, and what did feminine hygiene look like? So some just bled through their clothes. Some wore thong-like belts made of yucca fibers, twine, and other materials. A belt was a big thing, and I'm going to put a blog post up about all of this history, and it actually has pictures, but like menstrual belts were a big thing, or period belts, I'm not sure what they called them, but where it could belt around you and then like almost like a thong-like belt. And some of the marketing that came about when pads and tampons were first starting to come to market was like, forget the belt, beltless. Like it was a big deal to not have to wear a belt in order to like wear feminine hygiene products. Some would also have makeshift tampons, again, unsure of materials, unsure of how that all worked. But an applicator, a physician in Colorado, actually created an applicator in the 1930s for a tampon. It was not a combo, it was just something where you could stick the whatever you were using as a tampon in the applicator to help make it that much easier. The applicator and tampon combo was created in 1936, but it wasn't fully adopted until the 1950s. So that's how we've sort of evolved to today's period products. Similar to the products involved was the marketing that went in to sell these products. And a lot of the marketing, well, before I tell you any of the themes in the marketing up until today, I want you guys to think about when you think of period products, what are some of the words used? What are some of the themes that you see within period products? Pause it a little bit, think, or just I'll give it a little pause to where you guys can sort of think of when you see a tampon commercial or a pad commercial or liner, whatever it is, what are some of the major phrases that you see? Okay, I'll let you keep thinking about it, but I'm going to go back in history a little bit. There is a Codex booklet from the 1940s that talked about superstitions for women on their period, and there was a poem called When Grandma Was a Girl. And in it, it says, if she drank milk, the cows were doomed. If she entered a wine cellar, wine went sour. Flowers would wither at her touch. Meat would soil if she dared salt it. A look from her eyes would kill a swarm of bees. And that's Codex, right? I know that y'all know the brand of Kotex, it's a modern day brand. And again, that was from the 1940s. Isn't that kind of wild? It hasn't actually been all that long, not even 100 years since all of this has changed, I guess. So back when they were first starting to market all of these products, there was a focus on maintaining femininity. There was shame around our periods. They wanted to promote daintiness as women, that you could still be on your period and still be dainty and feminine and a woman and light and airy. There was also a lot of secrecy on our periods, or marketed as secrecy, like compact sizing or hiding your period to where they don't even know you're on your period, with being able to maintain your femininity and your daintiness. And so, not that any of those things are bad. I mean, I know I definitely want to be able to do all of the things that I want to do, but there was still this underlying message of shame and secrecy when it came to our periods as women, marketed through these period care products. So, today, this was the list I came up with when I thought about, okay, how are period products marketed to us today? A lot of odor protection, leak free, compact sizing. So, again, on some of the boxes it says like odor free protection or leak free or larger wings to make sure, whatever it is. There's a lot of things that still promote the shame and secrecy around our periods. And not that I think we should all be leading through our clothes or making a big deal about it, but I think that some of the companies that are doing such a wonderful job marketing are focusing more on the women's health aspect, where it's sustainable, where there's not all of these toxins that we are putting in these products that we are using monthly for our cycles. It's more on how the product helps a woman, like in her health, and not exposing her to these toxins, compared to the shame and secrecy of needing to require these products in order to hide that you're menstruating in some way. Because there was an article that I was reading that I'll link in the show notes as one of the resources, but she was like, heaven forbid our tennis partners know that we are on our cycles, right? Like, it was just something so secretive, like something that we felt like we had to hide and be ashamed of when we are on our periods. And I feel like that needs to switch, because even modern day marketing is feeding into some of these, again, not near to the extent, but some of these Hippocrates and Aristotle thoughts of it being shameful and secretive and alone and disheveled look about us. So it's interesting to see the connection, I guess, that we can make between period products that are supposed to help us feel our best selves and the underlying message of our periods still need to be secretive and shameful and private, right? So just kind of an interesting message and something interesting to like think about and look into. And I had no idea when I was researching about how far back some of the literature and research went about, and maybe not even research, because Hippocrates and Aristotle were thinking of things from like a logical standpoint, or what they thought was logical, not necessarily from science, because they didn't have cadaver labs to know about any of this, or I don't know, there was just not as much as we have today. So it's interesting to like go back in the history, and again, thank God that I was born in this era, because the way they treated women back then is not something that I like. It's laughable now, but it's still a little bit sad because that actually happened. So the idea about this episode actually came from a post that I recently saw on LinkedIn by Emma Balimaka, and I am probably butchering her last name, but she is out of Belgium, and she is creating a productivity app for women by women based on our menstrual cycles. And I'll link the episode below of the menstrual cycle series and the episode I did on like motivation and how I structure my month around my menstrual cycle. And I was like, maybe I'll create a resource. I was thinking some sort of Notion template, some sort of like Google Sheets document, something very PDF ebook like. Well, she's actually created an app for it and utilizing AI to help you and help me figure out like, oh, if I have an important meeting that I'm in charge of, when should I schedule that based on when I might feel more motivated on my period? What about vacations? What about, just different things? So it's in the testing phase right now. I'll leave the link below, but when I found her on LinkedIn and found that what she was building, I was like, this is exactly what we needed, So I want to share a quote from her that she wrote on LinkedIn that sort of inspired this post, and something that I felt like was really applicable to the history of the menstrual cycle and how it's almost viewed in a similar way today as it was, way back when in the Hippocrates and Aristotle, ancient Rome, ancient Greece time. So Emma writes, are we performing exhaustions to justify rest? Today I spoke with a male friend about what would the Sansa woman wear during each phase. And that is the name of her app, the Sansa, like Sansa or Sansa series on Instagram. He commented that all the styles I shared were too intricate, too elaborate, because women need a day to feel shitty during their period. No worries, I love this guy. And by the end of our conversation, he saw what I meant. But still, let's talk about this. Why do we perform weakness to be allowed rest? We've all seen the quirky My Cycle in 4 Phases videos. Menstrual phase, sweatpants, greasy hair, curled up like a half-dead Victorian child. Pause. Remember Aristotle's viewpoint of a disheveled woman out in the field isolated? I mean, kind of reminiscent, right? Follicular phase, suddenly energized, throwing a ponytail in, going for a run. Ovulation phase, sexiest woman alive, dancing in a tight dress, hair blowing in the wind. Luteal phase, screaming, throwing things, eating chips in bed like a goblin. These videos are funny, sure, but they reinforce the idea that we are pathetic when we bleed. Why must we look like we're dying for society to accept that we need rest? Why do we have to perform exhaustion to be taken seriously when we slow down? Man, if you don't get out of here. Do you want me looking like a zombie in sweatpants for my rest to be valid? Girl, you will find me full bleed, wrapped in my flowy garments, adorned in my crystals, looking like a terrifying goddess who holds life and death in her hands. Rest is not a weakness, it is power. Decolonizing the cycle means seeing it for what it is, ritual, not suffering. We may not have the energy to perform for capitalism, but we have the strength to show up for our intuition, community, and families. Indigenous women didn't collapse into a corner when they bled. They gathered, they made decisions, they moved with intention. I refuse to shrink myself to be palatable during menstruation. I refuse to play dead just to be taken seriously when I say I need rest. My period is not my weakness, it is my portal. And I feel like that is just such a wonderful way to end this episode, from ancient Greece, ancient Rome, to how people and women are out there are trying to change the narrative of our periods and of our menstrual cycle. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you want to sign up for the menstrual program, I'll leave that link below, in addition to all of the resources, all of the references for today's episode. But thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode, and I'll see you guys again on the next Wellness Big Sis the Pod episode.